evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukee Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the table in the hall. If you have not picked up an agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, please add your name and contact information to the sign-up list located on the table in the hallway. If you wish to testify, please also fill out a yellow comment card. We will follow the basic format listed on the back of the agenda, including all of the hearing procedure steps. We may vary from the process depending on the specific circumstances of each hearing. Thank you. We have no minutes to review today. Are there any informational items from staff?
I would just say that David Levitan here, filling in for Planning Director Denny Egner, who's over at the joint discussion between the City Council and the County Board of Commissioners. They're discussing a variety of different housing-related topics, including Hillside, among other things. We'll get into a little bit more on the future forecaster, but just a couple of changes that on November 12th, you're going to be having a public hearing item for some amendments to our ADU code, which are mandated by House Bill 2001 that was passed this last summer, that we just realized that we actually need those become effective on January 1st, 2020, the section related to ADUs. So we're pushing that through. They're pretty limited in scope, and we can get into that a little bit more towards the end of the meeting, which I think should be pretty short.
Next on the agenda is audience participation. This is an opportunity to comment on any items not on tonight's agenda. If you wish to comment on an item that is on the agenda, there will be a time for the comments after the presentation. Is there anyone here to comment on an item that's not on the agenda? Okay, so we'll move to the public hearing on the Elk Rock Estates NR 2018-005. This is a continuation in the hearing. So the public hearing on Elk Rock Estates is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider application NR 2018-005. The Commission initiated this hearing on July 23rd. It was continued to September 20th, and then again to October 8th, and then finally to today. We had a preliminary deliberation on October 8th, and today we're here for a final deliberation phase of the hearing, meaning both the record and the public testimony are closed. Before we begin, I would like to give each commissioner the opportunity to state their intent to participate in or abstain from the hearing. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain?
No.
No. Does any member wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
No.
And does any member wish to report on any ex parte contacts?
No.
No.
And does anyone have any rebuttal to the ex parte contacts declared by the commissioners? No. Will anyone who has visited the site prior to the hearing please raise their hand? And did any of those commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from the staff report?
No.
No. And have any commissioners that may have missed any of the previous hearings reviewed the material from those hearings and are prepared to participate?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the commission? Okay. So we're not going to reopen the record. I think we are going to move straight into discussion. Is the commission prepared to discuss the findings of denial that we were preliminary voted on during our last hearing?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So just to remind us all, during the last hearing on September 10th, the Commission conducted our preliminary deliberations and voted on a recommendation for denial based on a limited set of findings that are in Attachment 1. The findings were around the flood hazard regulations and the alternatives analysis required for the natural resource cluster development. Commissioner Massey, would you like to go first with any deliberation items?
Well, I don't really see anything that would change my original view when the applicant was denied.
Okay. Commissioner Edge?
I've had an opportunity to review the draft findings or recommended findings of denial, and I have no objections to adopting these as they are presented.
Commissioner Heimer?
Once again, I will not be voting for this package based on, not because of the floodplain. I agree with those issues, but I do not agree with the alternatives analysis. I believe that that is generally done ahead of time, and the developer, and that they did try to minimize the amount of work into the natural resource area.
Okay. Thank you. Generally agree with Commissioners Edge and Massey that the findings are appropriate at this final deliberation stage. I did have one comment, which was the finding around the mitigation plantings, which is page 17. And the finding number is 4.B.3. And there's a note here that says the proposal. No, is that the one? Sorry, I was looking for the note around the mitigation plantings. I think there was a statement in here that says the commission finds that the mitigation plantings are satisfactory, and that is not something we deliberated on. And so I wanted to discuss that briefly. If I could. So, okay, I see what it's page 13, and it's the third paragraph from the top of the page. Even with the risk of periodic flooding, the Planning Commission finds that the mitigation area is appropriate and therefore meets the development standards of MMC 19.402.11. And we didn't actually deliberate on the mitigation plantings, and I would prefer that we strike that and either include a statement that the Commission does not make any findings on the mitigation area, and that would be not necessary for us to provide findings on that as part of this denial.
I would agree.
You would agree with that?
Yes.
You need a proposal?
So I think we would, with that comment, we can take a motion.
Sure.
Oh, you want to do it?
Go ahead.
Okay. I move that we adopt the recommended findings for denial for file NR-2018-005 et al. And deny this application pursuant to these findings as amended by Commissioner Burns. Do I need to specify the?
I think as amended is probably.
As amended.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
The motion passes. If anybody wishes to appeal this decision to the City Council, you must make application stating the grounds for your appeal within 15 days of the mailing of the notice of decision. Please see planning staff for details. Okay. Thank you. So that was our only public hearing for the evening. So we will move on to work session items.
All right. So, do you have any preference? I can bring up the work plan on the screen, or we can just work off of the work plan that's included in your packet. I think for the purpose of the audience, if anyone's following along, I'll go ahead and pull it up just so we can discuss it. So I'll move on up to the front there. So again, David Levitan, Senior Planner. So what we are here to discuss tonight is that next Tuesday, October 15th, during the work session, the Planning Commission has been invited for a joint meeting with the City Council to discuss the Commission's work plan for the next, we've mapped out the next 3 years, 2020 to 2022, And so we had a couple of questions that were included within the staff report, but we are mainly in advance of that meeting wanting to get any kind of preliminary feedback or things that the Planning Commission thinks that we need to be focusing on. Any items that you see that really pique your interest or that you think need further exploration or a more robust effort related to that. It is, I will say, a very ambitious schedule for a relatively small planning department and a relatively small city staff, but we are excited. We've been working on a whole number of items for the last few years through the community visioning, on through the comprehensive plan policy work, a lot of housing affordability related topics, and now we're ready to move forward with some actual code work. So the work plan has been basically broken out into a couple different sections. This first page that's on the screen now is kind of comprehensive plan map and zoning map related changes. So changes to comprehensive plan land use designations, potential changes to zoning districts. So you'll look through. I don't feel the need to kind of go through all of these specifically. I would say that as we've been reviewing this the last couple days, Denny, myself, and some others, there definitely are some opportunities to combine some of these efforts when you look even across pages. So for example, A4 here, which is housing, kind of merging and potentially getting rid of some existing land use designations, specifically moderate and medium, which have a high level of overlap. If you then go on to the next page, or actually the third page, we have a whole lot of work related to House Bill 2001, as well as implementing some of the work that we've done on the cottage cluster feasibility study and the ADU analysis that was done, the ADU code audit. So there are a lot of these things. Some of the time frames on these are a little bit different. So this is kind of a work in progress, and we're wanting to get kind of initial feedback on that. But those were a couple of the areas that we had seen. The Transportation Systems Plan, the TSP, is going to be a major effort, a joint effort between planning and engineering. There's going to need to be a lot of outreach. With the comprehensive plan policy work that we've done today, we specifically did not touch the transportation element or the TSP, knowing that we were going to be doing an update to that TSP, and we wanted to wait to update the goals and policies within the comprehensive plan until we did a more robust community engagement and kind of analysis effort. So kind of moving back to page 1, kind of the general questions that we have for the commission tonight are just, are there any areas where you see opportunities or where you would like to prioritize the Planning Commission's work plan based on what you've seen over the last few years, based on, code language that you've been wanting to get on the books, things that you think needs to come forward before the Planning Commission and then City Council sooner rather than later? I should have asked before this. I just wanted to confirm as far as next week's meeting, which commissioners will be able to attend. I think Denny may have sent out an email before, but we would love to have as many commissioners there as possible to just kind of help to stimulate the conversation with the council. So do we have an idea as far as which commissioners will be there?
That's at 5:15, right?
That one is, I believe, I would need to, probably should have known that when I got here. I'm kind of filling in on this one, but I can verify.
I thought it was at 4.
This is 4.
I think it might be 4. I believe it might be, yeah.
It says 4:30 on the front of the
4:30.
packet item.
I can be there.
I can be there as well. Just want to make sure everybody knows it's an early start.
I don't expect to be able to make that.
It'll be challenging. I can probably arrive at 4:45, but I'll try to get there as soon as I can.
And if we could just get a confirmation email about time.
Yeah, I'll
Please.
send that out, and I'll offer that up to the other 3 commissioners that aren't here tonight as well, just so they're aware of that time once it's been confirmed.
And place, too, just as,
In place? Yeah.
sometimes I do it at the public safety building, sometimes I do it here. I just want to make sure that,
Okay, so we'll send that out to the commission. I did have a couple notes here from Denny. We're if any of you have any kind of questions about specific line items on here, I would welcome those and welcome the discussion. I would note that on some of the map work, you'll notice that when you look at some of the neighborhood hubs work that would be related, some of the changes to the commercial zones, they have kind of vastly different timelines. If you look at some of the housing-related work, it wouldn't really happen until late 2020 into 2021, where some of the neighborhood hubs work, as far as implementing a new neighborhood hub zone, would be in 2020. So there's kind of over the course of the next 2 years, there's a lot of different timelines for different comp plan land use map changes as well as zoning map changes. We did want to kind of get your thoughts on that, doing it that way and focusing on kind of topic areas, middle housing, neighborhood hubs versus kind of trying to do all of the map amendments at once and then kind of coming back through with some of the code work after that. So I think that's something to be thinking about in your discussion with the council. What is the kind of the best plan of attack for updating both the map, both the comp plan map, the zoning map, and then the zoning code, just as far as should a lot of the map work be done concurrently across multiple topics, or should we really be, zooming in on neighborhood hubs and then touching on middle housing next and then touching on commercial areas after that? That's some feedback that we would welcome. I asked before about any priorities that you have that you'd really like to bring up. We don't need to be discussing these tonight. These are things that you can just be thinking about for the joint meeting for those of you that are able to attend. And then, as far as the bylaws, that was discussed briefly.
Before we go to the bylaws,
Yeah.
could we talk about the plan here for a
Yeah.
second? Just, so
Yeah.
I got my head around it. I'm sure there was a method to choosing these, and I don't want to second guess you too much, but because I think that some of these are, sequenced because you need to get something done ahead of doing the commercial zones or whatever. And so I'm not sure I understand that, but I have faith that the planning department thought all those things through. But I do just have one question. Why is the neighborhood hubs so high in priority?
A lot of that is because of the focus that we've had with the CPAC, the Comp Plan Advisory Committee, and then there has been a push from several of the councilors. That's something that that's definitely open for discussion. If there are things that you believe are a higher priority than the neighborhood hubs, I think because we've been doing a lot of work on that and some of it has been on hold until we start thinking about our methodology for actually implementing the neighborhood hubs work. Right now, we don't have a zone. We don't really have a discussion at the policy level within the currently pinned down comp plan policies. It talks about them conceptually, but for them to become a reality, they need to actually be implemented through the zoning ordinance and through the zoning map, and we want to have that discussion as far as how we do that. The rest of this is kind of refinements, whereas that neighborhood hubs is kind of establishment of a whole new concept that's not really included within either the comp plan as it's currently adopted or within the zoning code. So I think that was the thought, but that's an item that's definitely open. All of these items that are on the work plan are open for discussion. I think there's a lot of things that we want to be touching on coming out of the comp plan. There's obviously all the middle housing work that is driven by House Bill 2001. There is a little bit more flexibility on that we don't have to do we don't need to have our code amendments done until June of 2022. I think we would like to have them obviously done much before that, just so we can actually implement some of the policy work that we've been doing. But yeah, if
I'm just trying to be realistic. When I look at 2020, there is a lot in 2020. I think that's a natural tendency when you put down a plan of action and milestones chart, a Gantt chart, so to speak, of like this, is that you tend to, the first year and tends to get front-loaded a lot, and things kind of trail off later. And so I just want to make sure that, that we're not biting off more than we can really take on in 2020.
Yeah,
So I just look at the hubs and I say, it's an interesting concept and everything like that, but, from my perspective, it's not as important as housing and some other things,
That's good feedback.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm curious about, whether we can move up the work on, HB 2001 implementation, as well as, the comp plan, housing, work from page 1 that looks like it doesn't start until later, past the midpoint of 2020, I will say. Is there any way to move that up? Maybe, I guess I don't know when we're ready, actually ready to get started with that. If we could start that in January, that'd be great, I think. But I don't know that we're going to, this may be a reflection of needing to kind of get our arms around what the work would produce from housing.
Yeah, part of the reason for the housing being a little bit delayed is that the state is still kind of ramping up their efforts. They're hiring a number of planners to help with the implementation and to help with local jurisdictions to implement the requirements. I think there is an opportunity for us to potentially move that up if that is a priority that's expressed by the Planning Commission and by the City Council. I think from a comprehensive plan policy point of view, we're in really good shape. We obviously are just updating our housing policies now. We've thought about the language that's included with House Bill 2001, and we've are fully confident that we are not going to have to do anything to our comp plan policies, the ones that we've pinned down and will be adopting later this year. So we're kind of ahead of the game and can jump into the code work. We're going to need to have a pretty robust public engagement process related to that. It's one thing at the policy level to be discussing all sorts of middle housing options in different neighborhoods. When the rubber hits the road and we're actually talking about potential zoning code or zoning map amendments, that's going to be something else that I think maybe brings out a few more people than talking about housing policy. And so we're going to need to really start thinking about what that plan is to engage the public. But yeah, if the consensus is that we should really be moving that up, then that's something that we can look at.
And I'd like us to consider that in the context of a declared housing emergency. And then when you phrase it like that, it makes me wonder as well why neighborhood hubs come first. Not that I'm opposed to what makes sense, but that's my first feeling about it. The second feeling is that, like with the map work, I wonder how much of that could be done, at once. There's probably more to it than I'm thinking, and so, certainly being able to kind of group those together into as few processes as needed, I think, to have a robust engagement process, but also, as ultimately as few amendment packages as we need to be able to do that.
The only comment I would like to make is that, this is maybe a chicken or an egg argument, but the TSP will kind of go hand in hand with this housing, and the reason why it will is that if we talk about, we say, oh, well, we can downzone on all arterials or laterals or whatever there, and we have a greenway there, then does that make sense to have that greenway there if you're going to put in a bunch more density? Or do we need to change, if we're going to put a bunch of density in a place, should we be looking at our TSP to be able to get the bicycle routes and all that there? So I don't know which comes first. I don't know if it really goes well hand in hand. But I guess I don't really know the answer to that, but I'd like to kind of be thinking about it, because it's kind of one of those, it is a chicken or an egg, but it's kind of something that, if we're really going to put a good, robust plan together, this TSP needs to be a part of it.
Yeah, and there could be some kind of interim updates to the TSP, at least as far as some of the street classifications that would be needed if we're talking about any potential code amendments. Something that came up in reviewing the draft urban design policies from a number of people was specifically related to Monroe and the current designation of that hasn't been updated yet to reflect, the presence of the Greenway. And people pointed out that under the map that we shared maybe back in August that showed areas that would potentially be eligible to rezone to either medium density or high density, why was it showing it along Monroe when that's, envisioned as a greenway? And so it could be for things like that where there's an obvious conflict between housing and the future plan designation for that street. We would need to do at least some interim updates if we weren't planning on having the TSP and the housing work run exactly concurrently. If you're wanting to do one before the other, you would potentially need to do at least a couple of tweaks to keep it at least in compliance and consistent and not really, implement something that doesn't make any sense.
Right, and at least have the open debate on, is density on a greenway the right thing to do, or, what road improvements need to be made if we are going to add density onto things, walkability and bicycle ability.
Yeah, a lot of the House Bill 2001 related work is going to really revolve around what the city wants the approach to be as far as how we provide middle housing options in every zoning district that allows for single-family detached residential. We're going to be required to allow a duplex on every single lot where a single-family home is currently allowed. On the same size lot, we'll be required to allow it. So that's pretty straightforward. When it comes to triplexes, fourplexes, and cottage cluster developments, we're going to need to allow them in all of our residential zones that allow for detached single-family residential, but they don't have to be allowed on every parcel. And so do we take a hubs and corridors approach? Do we take a more dispersed approach? Do we do just corners? Do we, there's a variety of different ways to tackle that work, and that's going to then have an impact on the transportation system depending on where you're planning to focus those, denser housing types. And so the good thing, I think, leading into the TSP is that from the other utilities, so wastewater and water right now, the Public Works Department is updating the master plans for those right now. We've been developing some scenarios to analyze growth and the impacts on wastewater and water infrastructure. I think that GIS analysis that we're doing now and those scenarios that we've established, we're going to be able to feed directly into the TSP update, saying that, hey, we're looking at scenarios 1 through 5 with growth happening a variety of different ways so that we'll actually have numbers and we can feed that into, as opposed to looking at how it's going to impact, an 8-inch line, on your street. It's going to be able to say, well, what impact is this going to have on trip generation, and what's that going to do to level of service in different parts of the city?
And maybe that's, if there's something that's almost ready in the works, maybe that's one that you start with. Because, it doesn't do us any good to put a high-density zone into an area that can't be serviced, or there is a high possibility that there can't be funded to be serviced.
Yeah, so I think from an infrastructure analysis side of things, it factored in slightly as far as where we place the housing because we're doing that work now and we're just doing that analysis right now. I actually just got a memo today from our consultants and forwarded some of my thoughts on to Peter, the Public Works Director. But they're about ready to run the actual infrastructure analysis as part of those 2 master plan efforts. And so we want to have kind of as much information from those plans as possible so that we can feed it into our housing discussion. But I think we should have relatively good numbers by kind of the first few months of 2020. So I think there still would be an opportunity if the commission and the council wants to move up some of the housing work, we could do that.
Would it be possible and would it make sense to kind of pull out a TSP early actions as a high priority item that would allow that to move forward with the map changes and maybe even then push the other elements of the TSP out until 2021, making space for bringing the housing forward? Because I think we can't just bring things forward without pushing something back. But
Yeah.
I hear that the TSP has
Yeah.
elements that are really a high priority and need to be coupled with the map changes.
Yeah, and when you compare it to the rest of the comp plan, a lot of which hasn't been touched in 30 years, I mean, the TSP had, pretty much a complete update in 2007, and then there were a number of updates in 2013. So relatively speaking, it's in a lot better shape than the rest of the plan. And so if we needed to push back certain components of the TSP a little bit to accommodate work on housing or things that have been prioritized, I think that's doable.
My only other comment is that my suggestion would be is to do the neighborhood hubs at the same time that you do the changing of the zones of the GMU and the NMUs. And the only reason why I say that is that I think what's really going to happen is that a neighborhood hub is an NMU or a GMU, isn't it? Why are we going to create a special?
Yeah, the initial
I mean, it's
thoughts
just a general mixed use anyways, commercial down below with some apartments up above.
Yeah, so there's a couple different kind of categories of hubs, not all of which are full mixed-use hubs. It kind of depends, and we're still working on refining some of our work on that. As far as, we've identified these 11 or 12 hubs throughout the city, and it's not a uniform definition as far as what we see happening. We've identified everything from the King and Linwood Center, which is obviously already a fully commercial area, and where the hub would then allow for the addition of housing units to something that's currently just a corner store, which the hub may not be a fully mixed use development, whether it be horizontal or vertical mixed use. So we still have a little bit of work on that. But I think the plan right now is to kind of have a hub zone that is a little bit lower key as far as the intensity of development. And then for the hubs that are like at King and Linwood and for other places that are, 32nd already has that neighborhood mixed-use zoning, but to make something like King and Linwood have that similar zoning, that neighborhood mixed-use zoning, whereas a smaller hub that won't be as intense would have kind of a specific neighborhood hub zone that has a more limited number of uses where the densities are lower than what is allowed within the NMU.
So I did. My feeling, and we don't need to argue this point, but, we got rid of all these C and the CLs and the CGs, and it just sounds like that you're replacing that with neighborhood hub, and you know how confusing that got, and so I just want to make the general comment that if you combine it all together, it would probably make a lot more sense, and then maybe we can eliminate some of these neighborhood hub designation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through 11 for each spot. You understand what I mean?
No, we wouldn't have individual designations for each hub.
I understand,
think the thought
but
is,
you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
We're just trying to get rid, if the whole purpose is to get rid of the C, CL, CSG, whatever all that stuff was, all you're doing is substituting it now with an NH. And so maybe we can refine, the GMU or the NMU a little bit to fit into these smaller sections.
Yeah, no, and I understand the point is if we're talking about hubs and talking about the implementing zoning, we might as well just go ahead and update the map
Right.
At the same time. And yeah, for the most part, the kind of the lower key neighborhood hubs are the CLs and the CNs, because those are the ones that are, the corner stores on Roswell or on Washington or, so it would be relatively easy to have that discussion and I think roll in map amendments related to that. Realizing that we want to, some of the other feedback is we want to limit the number of amendment packages to kind of as few as possible. I think we'd like to streamline it as much as possible, but that is really good feedback as far as, how to kind of combine those two.
And maybe that might help push the neighborhood or the NH's forward in the year. Am I saying that right? Push it back. So that might give you a little bit more room to move the housing to the front, depending on how prepared you are for the, well, I'm assuming that the MU and GMUs is not a lot of work. I mean, you pretty much already know.
No, I mean, there's some discussion as far as, there's obviously going to be some amendments that we do and that we're going to want to tie in with the hillside efforts, depending on when they actually are ready to submit for their plan development, because there would be comprehensive plan and zoning map amendments related based on what they are initially proposing to do. If they're wanting to have community center or any sort of community services, they're currently zoned R3, so they're going to need to have a pretty big change. And so is there an opportunity to roll that work into the larger kind of map amendment work that we're doing? It would just kind of make sense because that is a pretty major site. The other major one is Milwaukee Marketplace, which is our only kind of essentially CCS zone, like large-scale commercial zone. There's been some preliminary discussion, and there is some guidance within the comp plan policies as far as potentially making that GMU to open that up to an opportunity for housing. We would want to engage with the property owners on that, obviously, before we do something major like that, because it is, even with it not being fully occupied, it is, a pretty big part of Milwaukee's commercial core. And, would they like that? I mean, given some of the struggles that there have been to fill the Albertsons, site. And so those are all discussions that we're going to need to have.
So I have two questions kind of on that one. First is, does changing the zoning designation from what it is now to the general mixed use, does that restrict any of the uses that are allowed today?
There are some uses that are allowed within kind of straight commercial zones that aren't allowed within either the DMU or the GMU, just because just the way that our zoning code works, it's kind of by exclusion. So if you have something that's listed within one zone and then it's not listed in the other, the way that we interpret it is, well, if it was supposed to be permitted in that other zone, it would have been listed. And so it's something that as we go through the GMU code, if we were proposing, and this goes for any zoning change or comprehensive plan change that you're wanting to do, is that you obviously need to think about, from a zoning code implementation, are we going to need to be amending any of the permitted uses? And so we'd be having to do probably some code work, some actually text amendment work at the same time that we were doing map amendment work, just so we're not saying, okay, well, now you have your zoning, and it's like, oh, crap, until we change the actual text of the zoning code, you're not allowed to do this certain thing. So we would need to probably align some of the text work with the map work.
Right, okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And then the second question is, what, for House Bill 2001, what do we need to have done by the end of this year?
By the end of this year, so the major thing is related to the ADUs. So there's multiple sections within House Bill 2001. It's like 12 pages long. It's not super clear. There's, and part of the reason why we missed it, there's been so much of focus on the middle housing types, which all of the stuff that's within, I think, sections 1 and 2 of the code, which deal with middle housing, and, for cities within the metro area where you need to allow duplexes outright, and then the other middle housing options within every zoning district, that all has a due date of June 2022.
Right.
What has the effective date of January 1st, 2020 that we currently need to amend our code to do is just the work on the ADUs. So we need to basically get rid of the owner occupancy requirement and the additional parking requirement, and that's what's going to be coming before the Planning Commission for a public hearing on November 12th. And so the 35-day notice for that just went out this morning. Vera is leading that effort. And then the 30-day public notice for your meeting on November 12th is going to go out on Thursday.
Well, I was, sorry if I may, I was wondering about the the feasibility of, including the amendment to, since it's really just a use table amendment, of allowing by right duplexes at the same time, since we know that's coming anyway.
Yeah, so that's something that we can discuss and that, I think because it is, I'd want to have a discussion with Denny and with Justin, just as far as, do we want to be doing that when the effective date isn't for another 2.5, almost 3 years? Do we want to be changing that now without having a little bit more public kind of information campaign, for lack of a better term? It's just letting people know and just informing people about what House Bill 2001 says. I think the ADU is a relatively limited change. It's something that the state has been pushing for the last year. There was a Senate bill back in 2017 where we had a code package last year that we had a very minor amendment to our ADU code as far as allowing an ADU for every house as opposed to every lot. When that was mandated by the state, they were at that time just recommending that you get rid of your owner occupancy and your parking requirements. We chose not to make those amendments at the time, and then they subsequently, through House Bill 2001, basically said cities, well, you have no choice anymore. The duplex issue, I think, is a slightly bigger thing, even though it is going to be required. I think the fact that the effective date isn't for another few years, I think would maybe warrant a little bit more discussion, as opposed to just kind of amending the code and kind of adding that on to the ADU work. So, but that's something that we can talk about.
Yeah, I'm just curious if it makes sense, again, in the context of a housing emergency, to make a quick amendment, like that, since we know that's we're going to have to make that amendment anyway. So that's why that crossed my mind, is something that maybe if we did that, then there becomes less pressure, I think, on doing the remaining housing work, like up front. I'm really, I think, anxious to get into the housing work because of the critical need. But maybe if you have kind of this, we'll do the ADUs and duplexes part, and then up front, and then everything else can kind of, sit on ice for 6 months or 9 months or whatever it takes to get around to it.
Yeah, and
it's gonna, again, kind of freeing up that first 6 months, or that first, the first 2 or 3 quarters of the year to think about, kind of getting some of these other things done. I know there's a lot of stuff in the first part of the year that we have to do.
Yeah.
The floodplain stuff, and there's just a few things in there that have to happen. And so since we can't move those, then maybe we push back on the neighborhood hubs a little bit, and we pull something else forward, and then push housing. I'm not so anxious to get the housing part up front because we did the duplexes first.
Yeah, and so there's I think that's good feedback from the commission and from Commissioner Edge. I think, just to clarify, we do allow duplexes in every residential zone now. You just need to have a larger lot size.
Yeah.
So it's not like duplexes aren't allowed, but in every zone except for the R10 zone, where you can have a duplex on a 14,000 square foot lot, so 40% bigger. In every other zone, you need twice the size of your lot. So they are permitted, but they obviously require larger lots that in most cases people would rather just partition their property. At least that's been the preference over the last several decades. I think as it relates to House Bill 2001, there is language in there where you basically don't need to be worried about the infrastructure constraints, and you can make these things without doing your typical TPR and your transportation planning rule analysis. I would assume even if we fast-tracked the duplex work and didn't have it as part of our larger housing complex, you probably could still fall back on that language within House Bill 2001, but I would need to confer with Justin as, hey, if we wanted to do an interim amendment where we're going to allow duplexes anywhere that a single-family home is allowed, do we need to do, would we consider that upzoning that's pursuant to the transportation planning rule.
Right.
And so just need to clarify that from the legal side of things. Can we even do it that way, or does it really need to be that whole package coming together? There hasn't been, a whole lot of guidance from the state at this point, just because they've hired, I think, their main planner that's going to be managing this project, but they still need to hire for another 3 or 4 positions. So we've offered ourselves up as kind of the guinea pig, like, hey, we're ready to go on the code work if you need somebody to be an early adopter. And so Kirsten Green, who is the main consultant on the vision, is actually the acting deputy director that's kind of leading up this effort. So we have relationships already with the state and with several of the key staff. So I think we're in a pretty good spot.
That's excellent.
But yeah, we'll need to have some additional discussions to even consider that.
Yeah, if it turns into a bigger thing where you're having to, look at the TPR, and basically if the state's not absolving you by saying you have to do this, but also you have to do all of the extra stuff involved with doing that, then it doesn't really, I guess it doesn't really buy you anything to just make the change in the use table, basically, but.
Yeah, we're going to need to just have discussions with the state as far as how we should be packaging this and how we should be framing it and what type of findings you need to be making to basically show that this is being done in compliance, and just how the effective dates of the different sections of House Bill 2001, how that will impact the way that cities adopt their codes. I would assume that cities are free to do it as early as they want, but it's going to need to, I think, be run by DLCD. It's going to be a little bit more complex than your typical 35-day notice to DLCD. We're going to want them to really provide a lot of the guidance as far as how we do this work. And so that's one of the reasons why maybe the housing work was pushed back a little bit. But I think they will be staffed up by early 2020. And, there is an opportunity to move that work up a little bit.
So I don't want to be a jerk, but I just want to understand that if the state has mandated something, then why do we have to have a public hearing about it?
Well, we need a public hearing because we're still amending
But you have to do what the state tells you to do, right?
You do, but you're still amending your code, so it's still a Type 5 legislative code amendment.
All right.
So you still have to go through the process, but we want to have public engagement because we want the community to help weigh in on how we do this. Do we want to take a hub and corridor approach? Do we want to allow it? I think, looking at the example of our neighbors to the north in Portland through the residential infill project, which is still waiting to be actually implemented and code amendments be done, including on my house. And so there's been, they've spent several years on that, and they're still getting the neighborhood associations, especially in certain neighborhood associations in relatively close proximity to Milwaukee, that are really pushing back on that because they felt that there wasn't enough outreach and engagement. And so we want to make sure that we have a good program to make sure that we're getting that feedback as far as how we implement it.
And I do have one thing that I would like to add to the work plan, and the sooner the better, because I don't think it's really going to take a lot of staff time, is our chair, Travis, has been talking about this for years, getting together either with the land use reps from the NDAs or the chairs, or maybe both, and sitting down and having a meeting and discussing how we can support them and what kind of needs that they are looking for, or what they're looking for in their thing. I would love to see that added onto this.
Okay, so how often, like on a yearly basis or more often than
I
that?
think you need to do it once every couple of years.
Okay.
We could see how the first one goes, and if there's interest, there's interest. But Chair Travis has been talking about it, and as a strong proponent, for the NDAs, I think it's a well worth thing to do.
All right, great.
So I had one more question on this document. The Urban Growth Management Agreement, I was under the impression that, we were trying to get that done, I think even last year. And then now it looks like it's pushed out to 2021. And so I'm just wondering what kind of prerequisites there are to getting into that that's making it so delayed compared to what I was originally kind of expecting.
Yeah, and I would need to check in with Denny, and so if, on that one, just because he's been leading that effort, that's one of the few things that I haven't really touched at all, so I'm not quite sure what went into the decision to move that one back. So whether it's next week's discussion or just offline or at a future meeting with the Planning Commission, I think he would be more qualified to weigh in on kind of what went into placing that out in 2021, because, yeah, I know that there has been some discussions that there is, the provisions within the urban growth management, within our IGA with the county are pretty weak. There's really no incentive for anyone to come into the city. There are examples from other jurisdictions where to do any sort of subdivision or partition, you have to actually, if you're within that UGMA area, you have to annex. Beaverton is an example with Washington County. And so, yeah, I think there is going to be a lot of work still related to that. We have been working on it, but I'd be happy to learn a little bit more on what went into pushing that back.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, and then if there's any opportunity to move that up, if it's just kind of arbitrary, then maybe we can move that up. What happens in future Milwaukee is, just as important in the future as, what happens in Milwaukee. So, if we're going to be responsible for new subdivisions at some point anyway, then, it'd be nice to kind of be out ahead of those as much as possible. There's, few opportunities for that, for sizable redevelopment in the UGMA anyway. It would kind of make sense, I think, to make sure that those are consistent with, the city code and city policies if they get redeveloped, even before they're targeted for redevelopment, even before they're annexed. I think it would make sense.
Yeah, and our housing needs analysis did look at the entire UGMA as far as the development capacity out there, and we are looking at the dual interest areas, especially as part of the wastewater and water master plans, just as far as those, potentially eventually being within the city and how that's going to impact our systems and the different basins and pressure zones. And so, yeah, we want to, have a pretty good idea as far as what the approach is going to be within there and what the potential for growth as part of the city of Milwaukee is. And the UGMA would help to establish that.
Thank you.
I have one thing to bring up, and this is just really for the commissioners, and not making a solid proposal just yet, but, I would just like for us to think about it, is that there's a lot of work here. And I think that, something to consider, and I'm sure there's other ways to, to tackle this, is that possibly we have some assignments maybe of 2 or 3 commissioners to tackle, an area at a time, because we could be working on 2 or 3 projects at once. And I think that these, I'm a believer in the wisdom of the masses. You get a better product the more eyes you have on it. And I would just like to make sure that we have a good, solid scrub before we come into these meetings and we have 7 people trying to do a line-by-line review of these, because I don't think that that's the most efficient way to get through a lot of work. So that's a thought that I would just like you to give some thought to, but I think that, we're going to have some process just about tackling our own due diligence work. Yeah.
So perhaps identifying subcommittees.
Yep.
We could, working groups.
Subject matter experts.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that we could make something that would utilize the skills and talents of the commissioners and that kind of thing for best effect.
Yeah, I think that's really a good suggestion, and I think within the, when you're doing code amendments like this, and especially when you're doing kind of multi-subject code amendments, is having a series of technical advisory groups that could have a couple members from the Planning Commission. It could have city councilors on there. Could have technical experts and kind of coming together, then having that group be able to bring it back to the Planning Commission periodically to kind of update on, hey, this is what we've been working on. That's you're obviously all really busy people and already dedicate a lot of your time to this, and so we always we want those suggestions to be, commission or committee driven, as opposed to the city saying, hey, we got some more work for you to do. But if there is interest there, I think there is an opportunity for us to form some of those committees or groups that, essentially would serve that purpose.
Well, on that note, your historic resource inventory update, I just want to let you know that the Milwaukee Museum already has the list of all the houses up to 1970. We already went to the, whatever you call it, the title company, and got that because we're doing our own
Okay.
project. And in the midst of doing this project, we're going to take every DLC that's in the city of Milwaukee and break it down to when the land got divided, and break it up to the family farms. So we're actually doing a lot of the work that you guys may want to do. And Mary Newstander, who I know is on the DLC, she's heavily involved with the museum, so I've expressed this 1,000 times. I will say it 1,000 more times. You have a partner that is willing to start and work with you guys. You just need to give us a little bit of direction on how you want us to go, and we can certainly help you out. I don't think you necessarily need an advisor to the DLC from the museum, but if you would like somebody from the museum to come in during this work with the DLC, I'm assuming that the DLC is going to do most of this work, but to work with the DLC, we'd be happy to do that, or, just give us some instruction and let us go. We have two people that love to go down to Clackamas County and look up land stuff. They love to do it. I don't know why, but they do.
Yeah, I think it would be good to have that discussion and identify any areas where you feel like you need some additional either technical assistance or any sort of financial assistance.
No. Here's the deal. We want to be able to produce work that you guys can do instead of it just us replicating the same thing, right? And so if you give us some direction on what you guys need, then we can work in that direction. I don't know what the process is. I don't know what the state makes you do. I don't know if you have to have a professional. I don't know what the rules are. But I'm just telling you that if you give us a little bit of direction, we can work our project into your guys' needs.
Yeah, well, that's a very generous offer, and yeah, we appreciate it.
There's one subcommittee for you. I'll be on that one.
Very good.
All right, any other questions? Or else, yeah, if you think of anything in advance of next Tuesday's meeting with the council, which I will make sure to send out an email confirming the time, and I'll send that to all 7 commissioners, then just let me or Denny know. So, all right. Thank you.
So did we actually talk about the bylaws?
No.
Oh, there was no recommended changes.
There were no recommended changes, so before...
We might have to
got it.
add in subcommittees now that...
Yeah, that's something that we can bring up. There was nothing that we had identified that was lacking currently as the way that the Planning Commission functions. But if there are any recommendations or suggestions, or if you want to get it into your bylaws that, that you are going to meet periodically within, with land use chairs or with NDAs, I mean, that is something that potentially could be in there if you want to give it a little bit more teeth. So...
Go ahead, you got a comment?
No, I was wondering if that's something that, David invited us to add something to the bylaws if we felt that there was a need to do so, and I was just looking.
In our bylaws, it says that we're supposed to meet with the DLC once a year. Oh, is it twice a year?
Yeah.
We might want to reduce that to once a year, since we never make the twice a year. And yeah, I think it would be nice that every 2 years, the Planning Commission meets with the land use chairs of the NDAs.
Do we want to?
And we might as well put in, if we're changing the bylaws, we might as well put in that I don't know what the bylaws say, but the Planning Commission can form subcommittees to discuss code amendments. I think that is the idea.
It's already in here under Article 6, Duties of Officers, C, appointments of specific projects on committees. The chair may appoint commissioners to specific projects or committees and may select a commissioner to be spokesperson for the commission when the chair or vice chair is unavailable. So that's pretty non-specific, but, but it does allow for special projects, and special committees and the chair has the authority to delegate or to assign us to those committees. So unless you want to amend that, then I think we're covered.
Yep, sounds like a loophole to me, sounds like a loophole to me.
The loophole you were looking for?
Although this is not in the bylaws, it's in the Planning Commission Chapter 2.16, which is page 21 of the package. I just got to, I have to give you this observation. It says under A1, keeping current, under established purpose, the Planning Commission is responsible but not limited to the following activities. Keep current the comprehensive plan.
Keep current what?
Keep current the comprehensive plan. That's what the commission is responsible for.
We're doing a great job of it.
Good thing we have staff help.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to throw a dart. I just, I mean, is there anything that I mean, we say we haven't done much work on it in decades. That's what I heard earlier. I mean, is there should there be something codified that says how often you update the plan? Is there any best practices among, in the planning associations?
There are 20-year planning horizons.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we do
I
have
understand you
some.
don't do it every year or anything like that, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think the state requires, I wouldn't say even require every 20 years, but I think that's.
Yeah, and when I say that we have touched the plan, we just haven't done a major or complete update, a real, completely redone our policies that we've done this. We hadn't done it since 1989. We've amended the plan a number of times when it comes to North Milwaukee, when it comes to downtown, when it comes to central Milwaukee. There's been a lot of work to kind of other documents that then were incorporated into the comprehensive plan. When we did the moving forward Milwaukee work, especially, that was the most recent kind of that and the North Milwaukee Innovation Area are the two most recent large-scale planning efforts that are related. They're parts of the comp plan. They're just not the main chapters related to housing policies and economic development and natural resource protection. The state in the past has had periodic review where every 7 to 10 years you typically have to do something similar to what we've been doing over the last 2 years, ever since the recession. Even coming out of the recession, DLCD and LCDC, so Department of Land Conservation and Development, and then the commission that, ultimately you present plan amendments to, have not gotten back to their staffing levels. They are just not staffed to require cities to do that periodic review. Best practices, whether, having worked in kind of all 3 states along the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington, the best practices in each state are generally every 7 to 10 years to do a relatively major update, but very few cities have done that, just because.
Well, it's a major undertaking, I understand that.
It's a major undertaking, and then the state actually has a lot of funding for it, and so they would pick, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 jurisdictions in the state and then actually help them pay for the work. And then periodic review was sort of still on the books, but it was an unfunded mandate. And then they just really got rid of actually enforcing the requirements. And so, we would love to keep it as current as possible. We also wanted to make sure that we approached a periodic review level of public engagement for our comp plan work. So if and when periodic review comes back, we can raise our hands and tell the state, hey, we get to be at the back of the line because we just did basically a whole update. For example, in the state of Washington, it's typically the way that it's read out in the Growth Management Act is every 7 years, but even that is somewhat flexible. So.
Well, no one likes state homework deadlines, but without a forcing function, then you end up going a long time without updating the plan. So, Yeah.
You do, and there are different things related to the housing needs, at least different components of the plan with your, your economic opportunities analysis, your housing needs assessment, things that you need to do that might be, regulated by a certain provision within state law or state code that you have to do that more often. But then, cities get so focused on just meeting those two requirements that they don't touch anything else. And so, or, TSP updates, if Metro starts telling you that they're going to withhold transportation funding because your TSP is so old and outdated, then yes, you're going to update your TSP. So.
I'll throw one more thing. R5 should be in the R7 and the R10 area.
Yeah, and I think
That's actually really a question you wanted to have answered tonight, but.
Yeah, we have too many land use designations. There's no real reason to have a low and a moderate and a medium when they, the way that they currently read now in the language within the comp plan. I was actually just looking at this today because, we're not proposing to update our map, but we have a whole bunch of land use policies in the existing code that we need to carry forward until we make those map amendments, because we can't just not have comp plan language related to the different comp plan land use designations, because then you create a comp plan that's out of compliance with your zoning code. You don't have anything, the zoning code is implementing something that no longer exists. And so we're going to need to carry those over, but we had thought about making some preliminary recommendations to combine some of those. Do we get rid of, do we just have low, medium, and high? Get rid of the moderate, and just R5 is the only one within moderate. It would just move into the R7 and R10. But then I think we want to have a larger discussion on the zoning side of things, is like, do we still need R5, R7, and R10? Do we need all of those, especially with some of the changes that we're going to need to make related to middle housing, related to House Bill 2001? Does it still make sense to have, we have R10, R7, R5, R3, R2.5, R2, R1, and then we have all of our mixed-use zones as well. It's a lot of zoning districts for a city of 20,000. So, we want to have that discussion as well.
Okay.
Any last comments on our work session item? Nope. Okay. Thanks, David.
Great, thank you.
The next item on our agenda is Planning Department, other business or updates.
Yeah, I think generally just related to the meeting forecaster, so we can tackle that now, or...
I'll just note really quickly, I've received a yellow comment card from Mr. Ken Kraska. We've already had our public hearing for the evening, and we're towards the end of our business. So, I think I recognize you from a previous meeting, and I know you're already on the distribution list for notices of appeal and final decision. So.
I think on the agenda, though, we haven't gotten to that section yet.
We've already done our public hearing on NR 2018-005, and we had our audience participation at the beginning of the meeting. So I'm looking at the agenda. We're on item 6, Planning Department, other business.
Hard because 2 meetings overlapped tonight.
So which you're on other business now?
Yeah, so
7.0 would be...
so the comment from the audience asking about the item 7 on the agenda, Planning Commission updates and discussion items. That's an internal discussion item. The audience participation item is item 3 on the agenda. So I regret for the folks who were caught up in double meetings tonight that the schedule didn't allow you to be here during the part of the agenda where we do invite public comment, and if there is something not related to a hearing, we do allow the audience participation at the beginning of all of our meetings. If there are other opportunities to interact with us in a formal environment through the audience participation open comment item or on future public hearings. So thank you. So did we have any other business or updates, David?
No other business or updates other than the forecaster, which we can talk about under item 8.
Okay, so
You don't want to promote the October 23rd
I guess
event?
Yeah, so that would have, I was going to kind of roll that into the future meetings, but Yeah, or I could have brought that up at the beginning, but, so we are having an open house on October 23rd at 5:30 at the Public Safety Building. Basically, it's an informational open house just to let people know what the process is going to be for actually adopting the updated comprehensive plan policies. So that's Wednesday, October 23rd at the Public Safety Building from 5:30 to 7:30. People are welcome to come by during any of those events. I would note that there's, for people that either aren't able to attend that or would, we always encourage people to attend their neighborhood district association meetings as well. We have been having CPAC members and planning commissioners go out to the various NDA meetings in the month of October. Commissioner Massey will be going to Historic Milwaukee next Monday. Commissioner Hemer is going to Linwood on Thursday. We have CPAC representatives going to Llewellyn and Lake Road tomorrow. Any other meetings that planning commissioners would like to attend, we would definitely welcome that to provide kind of a planning commission perspective. All of those meetings are available on the front page of the Comp Plan Update website, which is milwaukeeplan.com, for more information on that. So if there are any commissioners that would like to attend any additional events, we do have at least one planning commissioner or CPAC member that's able to attend each of the NDA meetings, and we've provided just kind of a short little bookmark handout of upcoming dates as far as work sessions before the commission and council, the open house, and then the public hearings, which are currently scheduled before the planning commission on December 10th and before the city council on January 7th of 2020. So people are, we encourage them to attend their NDA meetings and to also attend the open house on October 23rd. So thank you for the reminder.
Planning Commission committee updates and discussion items. Is that Commissioner Massey, Commissioner Edge, Commissioner
Nothing to add.
Nope. Okay. So forecast for future meetings.
So yeah, just as we've been discussing, there is the joint meeting next week with the City Council. I believe the time is 4:30, but I'll confirm that and send that out to the Commission tomorrow. On October 22nd, we have 3 hearings currently before you, scheduled before you. Partition, a driveway variance, and then a subdivision down off of Railroad. And so we'll see how long that meeting takes. We had tentatively scheduled a work session for the comp plan. Part of that being that originally we had scheduled down on November 12th, we had scheduled a joint session with the council. There's been a request to split those up to have an actual work session with the council on November 5th and have a separate work session with the planning commission. I think given that because there's already 3 items scheduled for October 22nd, we probably will not have the work session on the 22nd. I think we've done a pretty good analysis of the policy work. We really just want to present kind of as we get a little bit further on and actually bringing the plan together, what it looks like when we're going to be adopting any issues that the commission has. We'd really like to focus on that on the 12th. And I believe that on the 12th, so we have also on the 12th that the interim ADU code amendments that we're required by state law to do. And so, yeah, I don't think we really need to get into that much more. As discussed, we're really just proposing to get rid of the owner occupancy and the additional parking requirements, nothing in addition to that. And so that should be a pretty straightforward process. And so, yeah, I think that's what we have scheduled out. I don't think that we have anything beyond that scheduled at this point.
David, did you say you were anticipating a work session with City Council on November 5th?
No. So originally we were proposing that that the City Council attend your November 12th meeting to have a joint discussion of the comp plan.
Okay.
Now that November 12th work session here is not going to be a joint session. You're still having that work session on November 12th.
Okay.
But the City Council is going to have a separate work session on November 5th.
Okay.
We find that, you get 10, 12 people in a room, it sometimes gets, not everybody
Sucks
really
right
gets.
out of it.
Not everybody gets to have their say, so we decided to keep those ones separate. So,
Well, that's our agenda. I'll entertain a motion.
Move we adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.